Welcome back to the Cyber Resilience Brief, a Safe Breach podcast. Today, it's all about Medusa. If you run a SOC, you've heard the name, and if you haven't, you're about to. Adrian, we're going back to CISA, FBI, and MS-ISAC's Joint Advisory AA25071A, the Stop Ransomware release on Medusa from March of last year, that is March 2025. Why does a ransomware-as-a-service crew from 2021, which had an advisory last year, still need an update now in August 2026?
Because, Tova, we're going back to the future, and let me explain what that means. The number that should stop people scrolling is 300. As of February 2025, this is the Back to the Future bit coming up in a couple of sentences, when the FBI closed out the investigation behind this advisory, Medusa developers and affiliates had hit over 300 victims. Medical education, legal insurance, technology, manufacturing. That's not a niche crew. That's quite scattergun targeting. It's also a working business as ransomware-as-a-service. Here's the thing. It's still open, still operating. Updates to actionable advisory dated the 18th of August 2026, IOCs and TTPs by the FBI and CISA have been issued because today, unto their own update, there are now over 500 victims of Medusa. Back to the future.
Back to the future. And to be clear for anyone typing this into a search bar later, this is not Medusa Locker, and it's not the Medusa mobile malware. Those are three different things wearing the same name.
Right. The FBI is explicit about that in the advisory. Unrelated variants, easy to conflate, and conflating them gets your threat model wrong. I know skilled analysts are very wary of that and watch out for that. This Medusa is the ransomware-as-a-service operation, first identified in June 2021, that's built a genuine affiliate economy around double extortion.
So let's paint the picture here. Who's actually behind Medusa, and how do they operate as a business?
Great question, Tova. It started as a closed operation, one group controlling development and operations end-to-end. It's since moved to an affiliate model. But here's the interesting bit. The developers kept the crown jewels. Ransom negotiation is still centrally controlled. So you've got a franchise structure where the affiliates do the breaking in and the parent company does the collecting.
Unnervingly organized more than real-world businesses, as we keep seeing with hacking groups. What's the recruitment pitch to become one of those affiliates in this franchise operation?
So without naming bad things, it's cybercriminal forums and marketplaces, and the advisory says the offer runs from $100 to $1 million per engagement, with the incentive to work exclusively for Medusa. So they are offering you exclusivity. That's not pocket money. That's a career offer for an initial access broker.
And once they've recruited someone, how does that person actually get in the door?
Two main lanes: phishing, technique 1566, as the primary credential theft method, and exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities, T1190. The advisory names two specifically: CVE 2024-1709, ScreenConnect authentication bypass, and CVE 2023-48788, a SQL injection flaw in Fortinet EMS. Both are the kind of thing that should have been patched a long time before an affiliate found.
So let's follow them through the network. What's the first thing that they do once they're inside?
As you'd expect, discovery, living off the land. Plus, they introduced two legitimate tools: advanced IP scanner and soft perfect network scanner for user system and network enumeration. Once they've got a foothold, sweeping specific ports, TP, SSH, DP on 3389, CULL on 1433, MySQL on 3306. They're mapping what's reachable before they decide where to go next.
Now, for the listener who isn't living in a terminal all day, what does living off the land actually mean in practice?
Great point, Tova. It means they're not dropping custom malware for this stage. They're using what's already on the box. PowerShell, technique 1059001, command.exe, 1059003. For network and file system enumeration and Windows management instrumentation, technique 1047, to query system information. To an EDR tuned for suspicious binaries, this looks like an administrator doing administration.
And that's presumably deliberate. That's evasion by looking normal.
Exactly. To betray, you must first belong, to quote the famous spy Kim Philby. And they go further on evasion than most crews bother to. CertUtil, the built-in Windows certificate utility, gets repurposed to pull files without tripping alarms. And they delete their own PowerShell command history afterwards, forensic awareness technique 1070, to cover the trail.
The advisory apparently walks through the same fairly elaborate PowerShell obfuscation. How elaborate are we talking?
So there's 3 tiers of increasing complexity, and it's worth naming because it shows their tradecraft maturing as we've been observing them. Plus, there's a base 64 encoded command run with executive bypass technique 1027. Next tier, they slice a string like a download file into fragments and reassemble it in a variable so static signatures miss it. That's technique 1027. And the most elaborate one takes a gzip compressed base 64 encoded payload, decompresses it in memory, and builds a PowerShell script book from it on the fly.
That last one sounds like it's not something they wrote from scratch.
It isn't. The FBI identified it as identical to PowerRun.ps1, a publicly available stager script. It can open either a bind shell or reverse shell over TLS on port 443, technique 1071. So they're not innovating the tradecraft, they're picking up a well-known public tool and running it well.
What about knocking out defenses directly rather than just sneaking past them?
So they've been observed using vulnerable or signed drivers to kill or delete EDR tools outright. Technique 1562, impaired defenses. And for command and control, 2 tools worth knowing: Ligolo, Ligolo, a reverse tunneling tool for building a secure tunnel back to the actor's machine, and Cloudflare, formerly Argo Tunnel, which exposes internal services to the internet through Cloudflare's own tunnel infrastructure without ever exposing them directly. Blending into legitimate cloud traffic is their aim, goal, and the whole point.
So once they're established, how do they move deeper into the network?
Legitimate remote access software, and a long list of it: AnyDesk, Atera, ConnectWise, Horus, Enable, PDQ Deploy, PDQ Inventory, Simple Helps, Top, all covered by technique 1219. They'll pick up whichever of those is already deployed in the victim's environment, because using the existing tool is far less conspicuous than introducing a new one.
So if I'm picking up what you're putting down here, and a hospital or insurer that already runs, say, ConnectWise for its help desk, it's not a mitigating factor. That's an attack surface that they're using to their advantage.
That's precisely the risk, Tova. Combine that with RDP, technique 1021, and PsExec, technique 1569, and Medusa affiliates have 3 separate legitimate-looking ways to move laterally and hunt for files to exfiltrate and encrypt.
And we'll be right back.
Adrian, walk me through what PsExec actually does for them once they've got those valid credentials.
So PsExec, from the infamous sysinternals PS Suite, now owned by Microsoft, and the awesome coder that's Mark Rasinovich. 3 things, all with system level privileges: copy a batch script to a remote machine and execute it, run an existing local file on that remote machine, or fire off arbitrary shell commands with command/C. One script worth naming specifically is openrdp.bat. It adds a firewall rule to allow inbound RDP on port 3389, enables remote WMI connections, and flips a registry key to allow remote desktop connections. 3 lines, and they've turned a lockdown machine into a remote foothold.
And credential harvesting, we're assuming that's Mimikatz, our usual suspect. Am I right?
Spot on. Mimikatz it is. Dumping LSAS memory, technique 1003, to pull credentials straight out of process memory. That's the technique that turns I compromise one workstation into I have domain admin.
Classic Mimikatz. Now, Adrian, are there any concrete indicators from this advisory, and a reminder, this is an advisory, it's not an alert, that a defender could actually hunt for today?
A handful, and they're useful precisely because they're specific rather than generic. The advisory publishes an MD5 hash for openrdp.bat that we just mentioned, the RDP enabling batch script, another for a reverse shell binary named pu.exe. It also lists 5 email addresses the actors are using exclusively for ransom negotiation, all on Proton Mail, Onion Mail, or cock.li. Get those dealt with today. Worth flagging that they aren't tied to the phishing lures. They only show up after compromise during the negotiation phase, so you can get ahead of this by blocking it before you're compromised. Seeing it itself is a signal that something's gone wrong somewhere in your data essays.
So let's say they're already in there, they've moved laterally, they've got credentials. Tell me a little bit about what Medusa ransomware's actual encryption phase looks like.
So they use rclone, the Swiss Army knife tool, first to exfiltrate the data out to Medusa's own C2 servers. That's technique 1567, because this is going to be a double extortion model. The data has to leave before anything gets encrypted. Then they deploy the encryptor itself, a binary called gaze.exe, using PsExec, PDQ deploy, or Big Fix, and they disable Windows Defender or other antivirus on the specific targets list. You've all heard me saying many times, how are you identifying that any of your security controls have been bypassed or disabled? And you can't rely on that security control itself to tell you that. Skilled attackers disable controls.
What does gaze.exe actually do on the bug?
So very interesting, Tova. It terminates every service tied to backups, security, basic applications, sharing, and websites. There's actually an attack technique for that, 1489, and it deletes shadow copies, technique 1490. This kills the easy recovery path, really makes sysadmins and incident responders' jobs much more difficult, and at the same time, it's encrypting files using AES-256 before dropping the ransom note. Files come out the other side with a .Medusa extension, and they don't stop at files. They manually shut down and encrypt virtual machines too, which has got its own technique, 1529. Then they delete the tools they used to get in, forensic clear-up, technique 1070, making sure there's as little of their fingerprints left as possible.
Now the extortion mechanics. This is where Medusa gets genuinely nasty from everything I've read.
So, exactly that, Tova. Nasty it is. Double extortion is standard, pay to decrypt, or the exfiltrated data gets published. 48 hours to make contact, either through a Tor-based live chat or over Tox, the encrypted messaging platform. Miss that window and they'll call or email you directly. They run a .onion data leak site with countdown timers next to each victim's name, and this is the detail that tells you it's a business, not just an extortion racket. You can pay $10,000 in cryptocurrency to buy the victim an extra day on the clock.
That's a lot of money for an extra day. You know, the advisory also flags something even darker than double extortion, though.
Yes, the FBI documented a case where the victim paid the ransom and was then contacted by a second separate Medusa actor, claiming the original negotiator had stolen the payment and demanding half the ransom again for the true decryptor. That's edging into triple extortion territory, and it's the strongest argument in the whole advisory against paying at all. There's no guarantee that extortion stops when the money moves. It's classic fraudster activity and organised crime. They perceive any kindness, any attempt to negotiate with them as weakness, and where they perceive weakness, they will hit you again.
Yeah, it's actually classic techniques for traditional ransom as well. If you think about all the kidnapping cases in the 70s, times when people paid, the money went nowhere, people weren't found, etc. So some things just carry over from physical to digital, I guess. Now let's talk about why this advisory still matters well over a year after it was published rather than treating it as old news.
Two reasons. First, the vulnerabilities named in it, ScreenConnect bypass, the Fortinet EMS SQL injection, they're exactly the kind of end-day flaws that stay exploitable for years in environments that don't patch on a risk-informed cadence. If these two CVEs are still unpatched anywhere in your estate, Medusa's initial access playbook still works today, right now. Second, this advisory is one of the most complete tradecraft breakdowns CISA has published for an active ransomware-as-a-service operation. Living off the land techniques, the PowerShell evasion tiers, the specific batch scripts, it's not a one-time IOC dump, it's a durable detection blueprint, and it's worth all of us in defense studying as a great example of their tradecraft.
So for the SOC lead who's listening right now, where do they actually start?
Start with the two CVEs by name and confirm they're patched. 2024-1709, 2023-4870. Get the PowerShell command line logging turned on and actually reviewed, because that's where the obfuscation tiers get caught. Segment your network, so a compromised endpoint can't just walk to a domain controller over RDP. Require multi-factor authentication on anything remote access facing, VPNs, webmail, jump hosts, and audit which remote access tools are already living in your environment. Because the advisories list, again, AnyDesk, ConnectWise, SplashTop, and the rest, it's a checklist of what an affiliate will try to blend into first.
And offline immutable backups. I assume that's non-negotiable given they're deleting shadow copies and encrypting VMs.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Encrypted, immutable, covering the whole data estate, and tested. Because gaze.exe is specifically built to remove your recovery options before it starts encrypting. If your only backup is a shadow copy on the same host, Medusa's planned ahead of you.
The advisory ties its mitigations to CISA and NIST cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals. Is that mapping actually useful or just paperwork?
So, great point, Tova. It's genuinely useful because it gives a CISO a prioritized numbered baseline rather than a wall of text. CPG2H for multi-factor authentication, E for patching known exploited vulnerabilities, 2F for network segmentation, R for offline immutable backups. If a board asks, are we covered against Medusa, pointing at CPG line items you've actually implemented is a far stronger answer than we have a firewall. It's actually equipping you with a cyber order of battle.
Well, speaking of cyber order of battle, where does testing come into this, practically speaking, rather than just patching and praying?
Frankly, that's where I'd point a security team at their own control stack rather than the advisory alone. CISA's own recommendation is to take the attack techniques in this advisory, 1190, 1566, 1059, 1003, the whole lot, and validate your existing controls against each one, not assume they catch it. That's the same exercise we run in the hacker's playbook against actors like this. Does your EDR actually flag LSAS access the way you think it does? Does your logging pick up the obfuscated PowerShell tiers? Does segmentation actually stop lateral RDP? Most organizations find gaps they didn't know they had.
Now, Adrian, one last thing. We talked about 3 iterations of this Medusa ransomware throughout this episode at the top. Now that we're at the end of it, what would tell you that Medusa is entering a 4th phase, something worth another follow-up episode from us?
So Tova, I'm actually tracking and watching 2 things. Whether that triple-extortion pattern, the second actor demanding a repayment, becomes their standard practice rather than just the one-off that we've been able to document, and whether the affiliate model expands its initial access playbook beyond phishing and these 2 CVEs, because right now their front door is narrower than their operation is large, and narrow front doors are exactly what defenders should be closing first.
Adrian, as usual, thank you for all of your insights on Medusa ransomware. This is a 3-year-old ransomware-as-a-service operation still running on legitimate tools, and a genuinely ruthless extortion model. If you take one thing from this episode, listeners, please patch those 2 CVEs and go check whether PowerShell logging on your estate is actually being read by a human. But until next time, stay safe with SafeBreach.
The Cyber Resilience Brief is a SafeBreach podcast. Executive produced by Adrian Culley and Tova Dvorin. Music produced by Sar Dressner. Hosted, edited, and compiled on Riverside. For more about SafeBreach and how you can validate your security controls across your entire IT infrastructure, visit us at www.safebreach.com. That's www.safebeach.com.